classless society, contradictions are true, and everybody will understand why contradictions are true. That's their literal claim. If you don't believe me, go study what they actually say. Leonard Peikoff has a great lecture series on the history of modern philosophy. You can find it online, where he has an entire, I think maybe multiple even, lectures on Marxism.
What is their like limiting principle when it comes to how they define the bourgeois?
So it's basically people who have Aristotelian logic. That is the most fundamental limit you can get. They'll have all sorts of stuff. It's like, oh, they're the capitalists. They're the ones who own the capital. But you can even be like petit bourgeoisie, right? They would say, anybody, even if you are a worker, if you're operating on Aristotelian logic, namely the laws of logic we all know and love, that contradictions are false, the law of excluded middle, the law of identity, that type of thing, then you're using bourgeois logic. This is where Mises adopts the term polylogism. That is multiple logics. They think the different classes, what really distinguishes them is that we have different logics. So we could never be ever convinced of communism. I tried to bring this up with in the Hazaldine debate, I believe. It is not possible for us, from their own perspective, they could never rationally convince us of communism because we have to have proletarian logic, and then we'll already be communists. So that's why there has to be violent revolution on the communist thesis. There has to be, because they can't convince the bourgeoisie to stop doing these things. No amount of convincing could ever work, because they have proletarian logic, where they understand how contradictions can be true. That is the gist of what's going on here.
Now, if I can jump in really quickly, I want to point out that what Zulu is saying here is highly contested by our socialist friends. But the problem I've been having is that over the last couple of months, I've been spending a lot of time going into socialist and communist communities and asking for, because I'm very curious about this topic myself. And because I think for most people, hearing that somebody believes that contradictions can be true is startling. So I wanted to get to the bottom of this. I've honestly, no offense to Zulu, but I've thought to myself, that is so absurd. It must be an oversimplification. I want to get to the bottom of this. So in the last couple of months, and this is just personal testimony here, but I have been in quite a few of these servers, and they've all told me the same thing, and it's two parts. The first thing they tell me is, no, we don't believe contradictions can be true, but also the only way that you could ever understand what it actually means is you would have to be a Hegelian fully. So I have to completely be... now, I wish that this weren't the case, because I'd rather just understand. But if you're watching this right now, and what I'm saying is driving you up the wall, please feel free. I would like to have a segment on the show where we just have a presentation, maybe 10 minutes or something, or maybe even 5 minutes, whatever it takes, of a Hegelian who's going to explain to us why this description that Zulu's giving. Because you must understand that from our point of view, if the counter argument that we're receiving is you have to already be converted to our side, and then you can understand, that's going to cause some strife. Now, I absolutely adore the chat we're having, but we're all the way, our queue is actually overfull. We've never had it before. We can't have any more callers in the queue, so we got to move on to the next call. I hope I'm not stifling anything too exhilarating. Our next caller comes from...
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
I was just going to say, may I say just one last thing?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, someone in Zulu's Discord actually mentioned that there's a deterministic, nature to it, which I just found really interesting. I never thought about that before, but yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Okay, so we have got our next guest here. This is Inti on the topic of the wills of dead people. Inti, you're on the air. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. So, as I understood your question, it has to do with why do we take the wills, like, for example, if you got the last will and testament of a dead person, why in an anarcho-capitalist society are we taking that into consideration? Since they're dead, they should no longer be having property rights. Let's go right to Floppa on that one.
So this is actually interesting. I read about this recently in like one of Liquid Zulu's courses. Like he covered it, but I would actually like to hear what you guys think first, specifically about, I guess it would be more focused on like a contract, right? Like, are you saying that the contract would no longer be legitimate just because they're dead now, and that their will can't be, I guess, exercised anymore?
Yeah, kind of. My contention with it is a bit, if you imagine someone has a house and then he dies and leaves his son in his will, his house. And then in his will, it says, upon my death, I want my house to be painted red. So why do we have to paint the house red now? Does the son have to do this?
Well,
Why do
I
we
think
have to take this into account?
Well, I think there would be some transfer of title of the house to some individual that individual must abide by contractually to paint the house red, I guess, in this instance. So it wouldn't be just him alone enforcing this. It would, he has already established that there would be a contract that someone else would have to, enforce.
What do you think, Anarcho Econ?
I mean, it seems to me that this is a situation where it's like the contract is saying upon the event of my death, then this particular property transfers over to this person. And I mean, in this case where it's like on the event of my death, I want my house to be painted red by my son. I mean, I don't think this is a transfer of any property. So it's just I want you to do this, and the son could if the house was his, maybe another clause of the will was that the house transferred to the son's property. Then he could fulfill his father's wishes, but I don't think there's any legal obligation to follow through with that. Or I mean, maybe they could write the contract such that it's like upon the event of my death, I want this house to transfer to my son if he paints it red or something like that. Maybe you could reword it so it's a little less you could maybe find some problems with that, but I think you kind of get the gist of what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Zulu is about to hit the ball out of the park with this one. I know he is. This one's teed up perfectly for him. So I got to get a word in edgewise first. So basically, I think that's all very well and good. I think the most utility you can get about this is just to understand that there's a little bit of nuance about what a contract is. A contract is a transfer of the title of ownership of something. And so if we think about it, you can, at any point, you can just give somebody something that you own while you're alive. There's nothing particularly controversial, as far as I can tell, with the idea that while you're alive, you can set the condition that upon your death, something else becomes somebody else's property. The only reason there's complication here is you can't leave in your will that any other person has to do anything. You don't have ownership over your son's body. You could say something like, and I believe that this is what our two co-hosts insinuated as well, but you could leave perhaps a condition that says, if my son will paint the house, he can have it. And in order for that to be valid, there has to be other stipulations. So if he doesn't paint it, then, some other thing has to be specified. Zulu, why don't you put a bow on this one for us?
Sure. So let's think back to the first principles of how does a trade occur, because it's not immediately obvious, right? That because I own an apple, that I can then transfer title of that apple over to Galazar. How do we establish that from our first principles of the NEP? So we don't just have, we believe in the NEP and trade, because that doesn't fly. We're not going to do that type of thing, because that's completely non-fundamental. So how do we get this? Well, it is a simultaneous abandonment and homesteading of the thing. So me and Galazar can coordinate on, hey, I'm gonna abandon this, and at the moment of abandonment, you pick it up, and it's yours now, right? It doesn't have to be literal, like he's got to grab onto it the second I let go of it or anything like that, because it's simultaneous, right? It's a simultaneous abandonment and homesteading. And by the way, this is why you can't sell your body, because you can't alienate your body in the first place. So you can't abandon your body, and so somebody else can't then homestead it. Now, from this basic sort of realization about trade, this is how we build up our theory of contracts, called the title transfer theory of contracts. Now, it seems very clear to me that, in fact, upon somebody's death, all of their property becomes abandoned. That fits our first little criteria on there. Okay, so now we're cooking. So could we then, before we die, coordinate with other people in order, hey, at this point of abandonment, it becomes yours, and we'll shake on that, and then we can have exchange with the condition being at the moment of death. That seems to me how you would work around wills. So it's not that the currently dead guy, we need to respect his dead will, because of course he doesn't have a will when he's dead. It's that we have to respect his last will. Right? That's the key. That's why it's called a last will and testament. What was his last will? Well, we already pre-organized it. That's pointing to pre-organization. Well, we in fact know what he prearranged to happen, and so we know what he wanted to happen at that moment of abandonment. So then we can have it transfer over. And I think that pretty much solves the case of Last Will and Testament. So long as they're title transfer compatible, then they can be done with the condition being, upon my death, this property transfers so and so.
Well, there you have it, Inti. You've got the full cornucopia of ANCAP perspective on the Last Will and Testament. Do you feel that your question has been answered, or is there something that's still not quite right from your point of view?
Zulu, you said title transfer is simultaneous abandonment and homesteading, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think the abandonment part is quite clear. About the homesteading would then have to happen at point of death, right? But couldn't it be the case that, I don't know, the son is miles away from his father's house? So how does this homesteading really work? Is it just the intent of the son to homestead it later?
This is what is interesting about this, because normally if I'm homesteading something out in nature, right, I would have to erect some sort of barrier around it so everybody can see that this thing is owned. They might not necessarily know who owns it, but they know that it is owned by somebody. Now, with exchanged goods, that barrier is necessarily already in place. So you don't actually have to do the erecting of the barrier. That's the key distinction. That's why if I were to give my apple to Galzar, I don't have to literally hold it out in my hand and he grabs it in his hand and then I let go and then he has it. I can just put it down on the counter and say, hey Galzar, here's that apple you wanted. It's yours now. Because doing it by proxy like that works in this case because it already has that objective border around it that everybody can ascertain.
It's certainly not the case that if Zulu left the apple on the counter, that Floppa could justifiably come eat it right quick before I had gotten the opportunity to pick it up.
But I'm hungry.
Just kidding. So would I be too if we were roommates.
No, I know.
So Inti, does that take care of your concern?
Yeah, pretty much. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. Well, that was a nice, straightforward question. We appreciate it so much. Did you have another question on that topic, or would you like the last word?
I think maybe one thing, can there be in the will a clause where it says title will only transfer 1 day after my death? And if so, what happens to the house or the land or whatever during this period? Is it unowned, and could someone then in the meantime homestead it, and who would then be the true owner 1 day later?
So I don't think that you could do that based on my analysis of wills here. You'd have to have it in escrow if you wanted that to happen. It's okay, well, it transfers to some sort of escrow arrangement with my lawyer, and then after the day, then it transfers. Sometimes people set this up with trust funds and whatnot. You could have an escrow management if you really wanted to get that thing to happen. But you couldn't just have a bare bones contract, say, and 3 days after my death, then it transfers from me to my son, because well, you don't exist any longer to do the transferring at that point.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. All right, you may have the last word before we move on to our next caller.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for enlightening me, and do what you guys are doing. Keep on doing it.
Thank you so much. We appreciated the call, and please feel free to call back in any other time if you got more that you'd like to talk about. It was a pleasant having you. All right, there we are. That's our second call out of the way, and nice and easy one. By the way, if anyone's listening, when you're done on the line, I'm kicking you because we've got a full call queue. It's not personal. I don't want anyone to think that it is. We've got our next caller coming up now. This is Kaorix. Kaorix, you're on the line. You've got a really interesting question. Would you like to share your question with us first, and then I will hand the call around, and you can get some answers.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Right, so we're going from one question about history to a question about dead people, and now I'm going to talk about the dead people of history. And specifically, I want to talk about it a little bit. I hope my voice doesn't break too much because this topic is a bit emotional. But for context, and as you can probably hear, I am a French person, and I've lived 3 years in a country with a very rich culture and history that has a lot of good, I think, and a lot of bad. And recently, I feel like I'm kind of walking into a field of ashes of people that reject that past, and it's causing me a bit of distress, I think. As I said, I mourn kind of the loss of the roots and the memory of the culture and the craftsmanship and the traditions that we have. So I have to related questions, I would say. One is, do you think that this love of the past and this love of one's country and what's good in history is inherently anti-libertarian when, obviously this is a country and it is therefore always full of evil and socialism and collectivism? And two, this is probably a bit broader, but do you think there's any hope for, I ask about the French because it's obviously more personal to me, but Zulu is British. Do you think there is any hope for other European cultures or even cultures outside of Europe to become more libertarian and more respectful of law over time?
So if I may, I could. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in just real quick and say that it's definitely not anti-libertarian to have a love for the virtues of your ancestors that brought a society to where it is. There's definitely a lot of virtues that have to go in to making a prominent and prosperous society. So that's not anti-libertarian. You can compartmentalize. You can go, well, bad things did happen at various points, but that doesn't mean we write off the whole ordeal. That doesn't mean that the men who build great works of art and buildings and so on and so forth, that doesn't mean that they don't have virtue any longer, because even if they were in themselves a mixed bag.
Yeah, I would like to just say that as someone who loves a lot of the aspects of America, obviously, yeah, I think a lot of people conflate the state and the virtues that the people within the state hold. So I think it's completely reasonable to say that, like, I love my language, I love the architecture, the craftsmanship that's been produced within the country, and the thinkers and philosophers of that country, obviously depending on the virtues they held. But I think there's a little conflation going on there. And I had something else to say, but I forgot, so I'll pass it on to Anarcho-Econ.
Yeah, I mean, from what I heard from Zulu and Floppa, pretty much just what I have to say. I mean, I don't think we should be conflating culture with, loving the state, a certain type of food and a certain type of dance, right? We need to separate these different aspects of a certain, I guess, national identity or something, and then, we can evaluate these with our libertarian principles. So you can certainly be a consistent libertarian while loving, a French dance and croissants, but you can't be a libertarian while loving the state and advocating for more government. So, I think generally just separate out the specific aspects of a certain, I guess, culture that, don't contradict libertarianism, but you can certainly feel pride in those other aspects that aren't contradictory to libertarianism. And I assure you that most of them probably are, like, food, dance, festivals, whatnot like that.
And I think it is worth pointing out, not to, I've cut off Galazar there, unfortunately. But you're getting me thinking there. And in fact, if you truly do have a love for, like, the virtues in a society, the virtuous men who did great things, then that in fact requires a hatred of the state, because the state is the very thing that is trampling that and trying to destroy those people and those virtues. So I think it's not just that you can consistently love a people but hate the state. If you truly do love those people, then you have to hate the state that is trying to destroy that culture.
Yes, that's a perfect launch pad for me. I was actually hoping I was going to try to respond less and leave it to our co-host, but I can't help it. This is such a beautiful, tragic but beautiful question. Beautiful, at least for my purposes, because it is so directly to the core of what's important to us. So I'm going to relay a little bit of a personal story here to everybody. Where I live has been totally demographically annihilated over the course of just 1 or 2 generations. So I think that it's probably not controversial in this group of people anyway to point out that the relationship between poverty and birth rates can be fairly simple in some ways. It's obviously a complex topic, but for the most part, when you start crushing people's capacity to provide for themselves, you're crushing their lineage in a sort of genealogical sense. How this matters to me so much is my hometown has been not only my hometown, but the whole region that I grew up with. My parents and my grandparents all of them, as well as this is true for my wife as well. These are groups of 8 to 12 siblings everywhere you go. And then in a single generation, it goes down to families with one kid, maybe two, but that's unusual. And everybody in that generation is not having kids at all. Now, I don't know a single person who doesn't attribute their low number of children to the economic situations that they're in right now. This is entirely something that's been imposed on us by the state. And all of these things that matter so much to us, Chaorix, all four of us, it's people at the core. I mean, there's no dance, there's no food, there's no art without people. And the people are gone. The people who, I don't want to go so far as to say that they've been killed, but the people who would have been born that weren't born because of the situation that's been forced on us. Now, in my country, in Canada in particular, it's even more complex because there's this narrative that the government offers us. So it's like, well, we need to bring in immigrants. So this isn't going to be an anti-immigrant statement. I don't want anyone to think that. But the idea is because there's this Ponzi scheme, which is our pension system. And everybody who is in Canada or any comparable system understands how this works, is that the people, you don't pay into your own pension, you pay into the current pensions in the hopes that when you are retired, what's going to happen is that the working people then will pay for your pension. This is very comparable to a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme. But we're experiencing severe demographic collapse because of the severe economic poverty that we're all experiencing that's crushing our will to have even our just ability to have large families. So what we're being told is that we need to bring in people from away in order to compensate for this loss and preserve the pension system, a pension system that's forced on us. And what happens is the people who are coming in here, they're coming in because of financial incentives. So when we're in where I'm at now, we have just had the last of our century farms disappear. So our century farms are farms that were in the same family for 100 years. There's nothing left of that. Our whole island is just disappearing. And what's flooding in is people from away. And I don't care what race they are or what language they speak, but they're coming here for the economic incentives. They don't care about the architecture. They don't care about all the things that came before. And so my point here isn't to say anything against immigrants in particular. It's to say this is should be a deeply personal issue for all of us. And every single major step that we can identify that's contributing to the loss of our sense of homeland, our sense of community, it's all directly the state. And again, I'm not blaming the immigrants. It's the state that we should be pointing the finger at for every step of this. So that's what I have to say about that. I do want to give some lip service to everybody. There's some people in the comments pointing out that it's a bit of an oversimplification to say money and birth rates are they're not a one-to-one thing. And of course that's true. But we have to, if you want to control for, there's always going to be people who have kids nonstop. There's always going to be people who would never have had kids anyway. But economic poverty does have a role to play in that. So that's everything that I wanted to say about that. Thanks everyone for giving me the airspace to give such a long-winded answer, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Chaorix, how do you feel about that, having heard all four of our answers on the topic?
Well, I definitely empathize with the loss of century farms and the pension system being a Ponzi scheme. We have the same problem here in France, and probably even worse. I want to give advice to everyone who's listening to this to patronize your local craftsmen, because they really need it, and they are being overkilled by regulations. And that's probably one of the main reasons why the tradition is dying. I totally agree with you there, and I agree with Zulu and the others as well, that we should compartmentalize as well and keep the virtues in mind while acknowledging and going beyond whatever evil may have been committed as well.
Excellent. So thanks so much for calling in with this. I want to give anybody else on the panel have anything they'd like to say before we move away from this topic?
I will say, because I believe it wasn't addressed, or it might have been addressed when I was taking a leak. On the other question of is there hope for the French or for the British or for any of these other cultures where there's a lot of socialism, is there hope for them to become less socialist? And I think absolutely yes. I am a full advocate of the white pill. Things will get better. And I base this on the philosophical theory of history by Leonard Peikoff, that unless there is another Plato comes along, we're due for a more rational society.
Chaorix, thanks again. You should have the last word before we move on to our next caller.
Well, if that's all right, I would like to give the last word to one of those great men that I admire from my country, and I would like to do it in French, if possible.
Absolutely.
All right, it's
Well,
It's a-
as long as it's a reasonable length.
well, it's very short. I want to quote Victor Hugo. Changez vos opinions, gardez vos principes. Changez vos feuilles, gardez intactes vos racines. Which translates to change your opinions, keep your principles, change your leaves, and keep intact your roots. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks so much for calling in. We appreciate it very much. I look forward to hearing from you again. If possible, we're going to move on to our next caller now. I'm going to, again, remove you from the studio. It's not personal. It's just we've got so many callers queued up. We're going to move on to our next caller. Guys, if you don't mind, stall for me here. I have to remember who the next caller is. So just give me a moment and talk amongst yourselves.
Seen any movies lately, guys? No.
I saw that the Odyssey was in full posted on Twitter. Like it just got spammed on Twitter. And I thought about watching it, but when I went back to it, they removed it, unfortunately.
That's right. I did see one clip from that where it was what's his name? The guy from Twilight, Pattinson. Where he's like, somebody get these beggars out of here. And somebody commented on that saying he'd play a very good racist character. So you can hear it in his voice.
Just like Adam Driver in that one movie. I can't say the line, obviously, but
you spear chicken, you know.
Yeah.
I do think that I don't know what kind of twisting has to happen for Robert Pattinson to also play the Joker. But I want that to happen because I feel like he would be a very good Joker.
It's crazy, dude. His acting career has been one of like the wildest to witness.
You can tell he actually gives a shit, which is nice.
Yeah, he does.
Gentlemen, I hate to interrupt such a heartwarming direction that was going in. We've got a super chat that we should address first. But I do have a really interesting call lined up next, I should say. Unfortunately for our co-hosts, our guests, it's perfect for Zulu. But before we get to that, here's our super chat. Is the burden of proof on the person attempting to homestead to prove that what they're homesteading is not is not owned? Or is it on the person denying that the homestead can go forward? Let's start with Anarcho Econ.
I mean, I think generally if you have someone coming up to, like, let's say you have like an abandoned house, like there's vines on the thing, it's like windows are broken. You can go and look at it and, evaluate the evidence at hand and say, yeah, I mean, this is probably unowned, but fundamentally, there could still be an owner. Maybe someone's putting up weird Halloween decorations and they just went, really over the line. So, I mean, yeah, you can't just go up to some property and make yourself at home. And then, the actual property owner tries to come in and you're like, oh, prove to me that you didn't own this beforehand. That's, that's my response.
Excellent. And Floppa?
I mean, the question is rather simple. I was more or less just going to say what Anarcho Econ said in that, like, there has to be some type of evidence to prove that a conflict may or may not occur. But I think it's interesting. So I'll pass it to Zulu, who may have be able to clarify it better.
Sure. So, I mean, we've all heard that saying, right? Possession is 9/10 of the law, right? It's a little bit prickly for libertarians because it makes it seem like, oh, well, he's got it. Sometimes it's used to like justify squatting and stuff like that. That's not the proper understanding of that. The proper understanding of that, in my view, is just another application of the principle of innocent until proven guilty, right? And this is itself an application of the burden of proof principle. It is the case that a person is innocent until you have shown that they are guilty. That is where the burden of proof lies. This is a fundamental law of epistemology that cannot be broken. Because fundamentally, let's imagine that I say there is actually a leprechaun sitting here on my desk at Galazar. Prove